Wandering Curator Evan here. Today we're going to be talking to retired astronaut Tom Jones. And in this video he's going to talk about what kind of training he needed to do in order to fly an STS-98. He's going to talk about the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, which was basically a gigantic pool that he trained in. But did you know submariners also train in something that's kind of a pool? It's the Submarine Escape Trainer in Momsen Hall, New Groton, Connecticut. It's 84,000 gallons of water. And they do it in the event that their submarine is stuck at the bottom and they're still alive and they still can escape, which is why I'm standing underneath COD's forward escape trunk, which is what the COD crew would have used during World War II or the Cold War in the event that they were stuck at the bottom and needed to escape. Thank you very much for watching.
The only other place that you can kind of simulate being in space is inside a big swimming pool. Here at the Johnson Space Center, we call it the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, or the NBL. And I've spent a lot of time getting ready for my spacewalks, both the American spacewalks and the Russian spacewalks, by spending time here at the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. And we have a full mock-up of the International Space Station, especially the airlock. We practice opening the hatch. Of course, when we open the hatch, we see a scuba diver's face there. We don't really see planet Earth.
Well, during the shuttle era, the goal was for a given amount of spacewalking hours, let's say 10 hours outside working in space, they would expect you to do 10 times that inside the pool, down 40 feet deep at the bottom of the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. And so that allowed you to run through all of your spacewalking tasks at least half a dozen times, if not 10 times. And you would then get the choreography sort of burned into your memory. When you go outside, you don't have a checklist that lists all the things that you have to do to get the work done. It's either going to be memorized or be common sense, or like turning a screwdriver, you know how to do that. Or your assistant, your colleague back inside the cabin has a checklist and he can read things to you, or she can read them to you. So the idea is to run through the choreography of a spacewalk, 6 to 7 hours outside, multiple times, approaching 10. And then when you did all that, you were done, you were trained. And then as soon as they could, they'd launch you into space so you didn't forget it before the memories degraded. So it's different today. On the space station, you get a lot of training underwater in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab with just generic skills. How to turn a screwdriver, how to attach this or that on the outside of the space station, how to replace big circuit breakers or connect cables, install lights. And all of that generic training goes into your mental toolkit. And then when you are up there 3 months later, they say, let's go over this with a video refresher. And then you can go out and do your spacewalks. So I did, in preparation for STS-98, helping install the US lab on the space station, I did 230 hours out in the pool for the 19 hours that I eventually got out there. 12 to 1. Yeah, it would have been about 12 to 1. So I got past the 10 to 1 mark. And then because of the way my career unfolded in the shuttle, you got generic spacewalk training on how to maintain broken systems on the orbiter. Then you train for a specific mission. I did that for my first mission to be the outside mechanic. Then I had 2 spacewalks that I flew on STS-80. They were canceled in space because of a malfunctioning hatch. So I had done over 100 hours underwater for that stuff. So then 230 more for ISS. So I can say that I was the most trained but never spacewalked NASA spacewalker. So the pool is 100 feet long, 100 feet wide, 200 feet long, 40 feet deep. It's about 6 million gallons of water. And so they put you in the pool, and again, an ordinary run in there is 6 to 7 hours long. The module for the US Lab Destiny was, a plastic and metal module that was hollow, but all the outside fittings were flight-like. They were accurate. So when you moved around on the outside of it in your spacesuit, you were getting the actual correct impression of where everything was. And so you built this mental map of where all the facilities and fixtures were on not just the lab, but on the whole space station. So they had laid out the core of the space station as it existed at that point. So we had the American Unity node, the US Destiny lab, which we were installing and activating. We had the 2 Russian modules that were there at the space station. And most of the truss that held the solar panels was in place in the pool. So you could move around the back 40 on the space station and spend hours crawling along on your fingertips, practicing and rehearsing your transition paths, how you moved around. And it got so burned into my memory that I'll tell you this, the space station had at that point a tower about 40 feet tall that had solar panels at the top. And they projected up away from the Earth and then extended the solar panels like that. In the pool, that would have meant the top half was out of the water. So they laid it down in the swimming pool like this, 90 degrees. And the rest of the space station followed that orientation so that I could train on the entirety of my jobs out there. But when I got to space and I was ascending that tower up to where the solar panels were, remember, for 230 hours, it had been lying flat on the bottom of the pool. So as I ascended that, I had a mental impression that I was crawling sideways. It was that powerful a mental map. So it was very strange to be, going up from the surface of the Earth up this tower, but nevertheless, I felt like I was moving along on a bridge, sideways. So it was a very powerful mental map that you built up. It was always the goal to train together as a team. And so there wasn't any purpose in going by yourself. So you always went with your buddy, and that was Bob Kirby in my case. And so we did that 230 hours together, maybe perhaps on one spacewalk rehearsal. We might have had our backup guy, Mark Polanski, our pilot on the mission. He got in a suit and came in and executed some of the tasks that we would be doing. So he had a flavor for doing them himself that helped him from imagining it while he was inside helping us. But also, if one of us broke a leg or got injured, he could actually step in and get the job done creditably. So we did occasionally, but like maybe one run out of 20 would he get in there as a rehearsal, just to give him the orientation that he needed. That was a great prank or stunt that we pulled. Actually, it was formally approved, so it wasn't something that we got to sneak in. But a lot of the crews were doing these space flight awareness posters, encouraging the whole workforce to think about safety as a priority and to preserve and protect the lives of the astronauts. So sometimes it was just a mom holding her baby, an astronaut mom holding her baby and saying, please do a good job on safety. Obvious avenue to pursue or strategy to pursue. But we wanted to do something different rather than just being four guys or five people, four guys and a girl in flight suits and say, please be safe. So I think it was Marcia Ivins who came up with the idea that we should do like a West Side Story kind of vibe with a street gang look. And so they photoshopped us in. We took a portrait, but they photoshopped us in against a brick wall with graffiti all over it, like you're in a gritty urban setting. And then Marcia said, hey, you wear this, we'll all wear jeans and black leather coats. And, a couple of us wore do-rags over our heads and sunglasses to look dark and menacing. It's hard for me to look menacing, but we tried anyway. So we all posed in those outfits. And, those of us who had been training for spacewalks for months and months, we had some biceps showing, in the photo. So we tried to look like an intimidating gang. And I said, think safety. You got a problem with that? And that was the big caption on the poster. And it turned out to be the most popular poster that had ever been put out by NASA for safety purposes. So it was a success in terms of catching the attention of the workforce. And I'm not sure NASA would do that again today with a street gang vibe, but 2001, you could do that. So the goal is to have a healthy crew that can do all their jobs for 2 weeks without getting sick. And the way you would get sick, of course, is to bring up a germ from Earth that has infected you but not shown any evidence of the disease after you've blasted off. And then you get sick and you might infect some of your colleagues. And there were 3 people at the space station we were trying to protect as well. So the protocol for quarantine was to put a shuttle crew a week before launch into isolation and protect them from getting exposed to common cold, other viruses and germs, so that they won't get sick while they're in space. And so the way the protocol worked was you'd live in Johnson Space Center's crew quarters down in Houston for about 4 days. And it was literally on the back 40 of the Space Center out in a little isolated corner of the campus down there. And they had basically a Motel 6 with a dining hall and a conference room for us to stay in. And the only people who can see you are people who have been inspected by the flight surgeon as being disease-free. And those are the key training personnel, some of our support staff, like the nutritionist that made the meals, and then your spouse. If the spouse passed the physical from the flight surgeon, they could come out and have dinner with you or a meal with you once per day. Children not allowed. I had two young kids at the time that were, just around 10, 13 years old. And because they're at school every day getting all the germs swirling around them, they could not come up to you and hug you or give you a kiss or anything. So your kids were at least 10 feet away when you did see them. And that wasn't very often. They tried to limit those exposures to the kids. So you said goodbye to them about a week before the flight. You'd wave at them here and there during that quarantine period. After 4 days, you'd fly down to the Cape with your crew and stay in isolation, protected from the larger population, and then live in the crew quarters down at Kennedy Space Center until liftoff time. And so it's a little bit isolating, but the good side of it was that um, you had no external hassles or distractions. So for a week, you could sit down and go, "Ah, I've always been meaning to study this important issue. Let me go over that again here in the quiet of and isolation of crew quarters." So you could rehearse and you could self-study and you could have crew conferences where, we didn't talk about this, we didn't run that to ground, let's do that right now. So have a chance to finally put the big picture together, cement it in there, and then you'd all go off ready and rested.
For this mission, you originally had Mark Lee until he was removed. Were you ever given an explanation for why he was removed from this mission?
Yeah, that's sort of inside baseball at NASA. But no, we never got told what transgression Mark Lee had committed that got him removed from the crew. We other four crew members with Mark, we were just told by him and then later by management, he has to come off the flight. And we all discussed our options. Maybe we would all resign because he was our good friend. Maybe we'd all resign. And they said, well, if you all resign, we'll just assign another crew and you won't accomplish anything except you'll have ruined all your careers. So, and he said, and they said, and I think we recognize this as well, if some of our friends stepped in to replace us, they wouldn't be able to do the job as well as we would have because we'd had all this training by then. So now we would be compromising the mission goals if we had walked out at that stage of the process. So no, we never found out satisfactorily. Someday I'm going to go to an astronaut reunion and over a beer, I'm going to ask my boss at the time, what was all that about?